welcome. And I want to tell you all, even if you are bare beginners, you've already passed 2 tests of coming here today. You came the day after an awful storm, and you came early in the morning, so you're a good genealogist already. So, getting started really involves, first of all, getting started with yourself. You know you and your life better than anyone ever will. And while you're looking for deceased ancestors, you want to make sure that in a few generations you have been a good ancestor to somebody and have recorded information about your life. When and where you were born, where you went to school, where you got married, what church you attended, your children, names of the children, their birth dates, where you lived over the years, where you worked, the organizations that you belong to, all the kinds of facts of your life that might be of interest to your ancestors and descendants, and maybe throw in a few good stories as well. Those are always particularly interesting to people. So you want to start with you, and I'm not suggesting sitting down for an hour and doing that, but over a period of time, adding to what you can record about yourself. You have information in your head already about your family, about your parents, your siblings, and so on. So sit down and put that on paper too. Whether it's right or wrong, you might prove yourself wrong in the future, but put down what you know, what you think you know, and that's a good place to start from. So you want to be looking at yourself, your immediate family, and the ultimate goal is to move in 2 directions. One, to move vertically back in time in your main line. That's your parents, your parents' parents, your parents, as far back as you can remember, and horizontally in each generation. So your parents and all of their siblings, and your grandparents and all of their siblings, if you know that. Get that down on paper. That'll prove very helpful in the future. Go around your house and clean out all the stuff that you know you have. You took a big box of stuff from Grandma's attic after she died and you never looked at it. Now's the time to take it out and see what she saved for the family. Go through your drawers, go in your basement, find photographs, find original documents, certificates and things of that sort, and records that people may have held on to for whatever reason. And when I did this, I found my grandfather kept an pocket address book from 1929, and in the back he had recorded some names and addresses of people who later proved to be relatives I didn't know about. Some, I guess, just friends. He entered a cemetery name and a plot number, and that was where he buried his wife, and where he ultimately was buried. So you get good things. Photographs I have, Civil War discharge papers, marriage certificate, a note from somebody to somebody else for whatever reason. One of my great-grandfathers served in the Civil War, and he brought home with him a Confederate dollar, and the family saved that. Someone's purse was saved, a handbag, a lock of hair, things like that. So things that meant stuff to your ancestors, and probably will to you as well. And be helpful in your search. The next thing you want to do is talk to relatives. Talk to living siblings, to cousins, to older people if you still have them. Treasure them because they know a lot. Aunts and uncles and grandmothers and great-grandmothers. And be mindful of the fact that if someone did have some wonderful records, they may not have been passed down in your line, but in some line and a cousin has them or a second cousin has them. And if you find some, do be sure to make copies of them for your records, even if they won't give you the original. But make copies of photos, make copies to keep in your files at home, and make extra copies you can take with you on the road when you're out researching, just in case coffee gets spilled on that one, or drop them in a puddle or something. You always got something back home. And then you need to interview family members. And it always said more than once. I'm going to change that to never stop. I have a cousin that I see a lot, we're pretty close, and I've asked her questions over the years about family members and events and so on. She has a lot of information, and yet I still find sometimes she comes up with something I haven't even asked about. It's because we were watching a TV show and it triggered a memory where we were visiting someplace. So I think her head is full of stuff that she doesn't even know she knows. I hope I get to have access to it. So do keep asking family members. Good morning. What kind of information you're going to want to look for? Our birth records. You know where and when someone was born. You know the names of their parents, their siblings. You want to know when they got married and where that took place, and you know whether it was in the church or the justice of the peace or what denomination of the church they were married in. The names of their children, their religion, where they lived in different places over the years, their occupation, what kind of work they did, and where they worked. They were a worker, worked in steel companies. Which companies did they work for? Can you figure out when? Military service records. From all world wars, we've got plenty of them to choose from. Almost every family has somebody who served in some war at some point. So learn about that, and where they died, and when, and how they died. Sometimes some tragic stories, but sometimes just information you might want to tuck away for kind of a medical history of your family, or kind of database you may want to keep. And then burial records for the cemetery where they're buried, and maybe a connected obituary, which you can find. And I would add to that the actual cemetery interment record, which you can get in the office of the cemetery, as well as looking for the tombstone and seeing what was put on the tombstone. Sometimes that's very useful, and sometimes not so useful. It's just say, our father, our mother, something like that. Nancy's going to show you some examples of some of the things you can get into with the information.
Okay, this is a really good tombstone. Sometimes the tombstone you find says, J.H. Smith, 1900 to 1950. Thanks a heck of a whole lot, right? This one is amazing. You've got his full name, you've got his parents' names, including his mother's maiden name, you've got these are his dates, not theirs, but anyway. Then you've got his wife, you've got her parents, you've got her dates exact, and you've got their marriage date, which is wonderful. This is in South Carolina, and I see a lot of tombstones in the South that have the marriage date on the tombstone, which is really nice. Now, at the time they were born, there were no birth certificates in South Carolina, guarantee you. When they were married, it may just, especially if they were both over 21, it may just have listed their names, maybe their age, maybe his occupation, and the date that they were actually married. Probably no parents' names. Now, their death certificates will be in South Carolina, and South Carolina has some death certificates online. So I went looking for them, and I couldn't find either one of them at first, but I finally found her. Whoops, go back. I finally found her by using her death year, and her death certificate calls her ISE as opposed to ISA. I never did find Henry's, but you don't stop with just the tombstone. You don't stop with just the death certificate. Theoretically, if you can find a tombstone, a death certificate, and an obituary, and maybe in recent years the little funeral card, each one is going to have some different information than the others. If you're lucky, there's not conflicting information. So the tombstone is a place to start, not a place to start. Now, boxes of pictures. I don't know what our grandchildren are going to do when they find these little bitty memory sticks and flash drives and things. What's this? We still have those boxes of pictures, okay? Sometimes somebody has written on the back who they are, sometimes not. The picture is going to tell you, if you're sorting out huge boxes of pictures, some of the people are not related to you, obviously, but you're going to want to pick out which pictures are important. And a picture is going to tell you at least 3 things. It's going to tell you who, where, and when. It might be why. Lady in a long white dress holding flowers, that's kind of a why. You know, sometimes there's not a why. If you're lucky, remember the old pictures where they printed the date right on them? Now that's the date that that particular print was printed. It's not the date that the picture was taken, but it definitely gives you a not after date and a relatively within date. Now, if you want to click it again, this is easy. There's a New Jersey license tag, 1932. Okay? So we know the picture was taken sometime between 1931 and 1933, depending on, when he got his tags. You know that the car belongs in New Jersey. You don't know that the man belongs to the car. You don't know that the picture was taken in New Jersey, but at least you're partway there. Now this happens to be, nobody recognizes this car, right? It's a 1929 Maxwell. My father was quite the lad. He's wearing high-top boots, and I actually own those breeches he was wearing. They are so itchy, you had to wear long underwear under them. But anyway, this is Daddy before he and my mother were married, and that's his car. So if you find a picture like that, you're halfway there.
You can see the family.
My daughter, my little one, my youngest granddaughter is getting ready to have a big event, and my daughter has been sorting out pictures, and Olivia keeps running in to show me a picture. Look, Nanny, who's this? I'll say, that's Olivia. No, it's Mommy, and she'll laugh, but they do. They look like the same person. So, yes, sometimes when you're looking through boxes of pictures, you just know which family they belong to. Now, this is a picture that was found in my grandparents' house. I have worked through most of the unknown pictures from Nanny's house. It has taken me decades. But I carried off this box of pictures. They would have gone in the trash, but no, these people aren't, I'm sure lots of households that happens. People throw away pictures that you would give your eye teeth for because they don't know you want them. But someone had actually put, now if we didn't have this typing, remember typing, somebody actually put this picture in a typewriter and typed on it. But even if they had not done that, you've got Kodak, New York World, and you've got Revolve and Thingy. So you know that this was the New York World's Fair. And of course they typed 1939 to 1940. Now on the back, they typed again. Aunt Becky was my grandmother. Brooklyn, hardly anybody in my family lived in Brooklyn. We did have one cousin that went to Brooklyn and worked in the Navy Yard during World War II. Or I guess a little before World War II, actually. That was not these people. It's my Uncle Bob. Who are these people? And I won't tell you the whole long involved story, but I did find out who they are. And actually, she was doesn't she look like the Duchess of Windsor?
Exactly.
She was a she was a daughter of Nanny's oldest sister. My grandmother had 6 sisters and a brother. One sister died in 1900, one died in 1909, and the rest of them came to my wedding. So it's like, if you're down at the shore, if the waves don't throw you back on the sand, you can swim all the way to Europe. But anyway, she was Aunt Annie's daughter, and all we ever heard was Annie died young. Annie died young. It took me forever to even find out Annie's married name. This was not it. This was her daughter. But anyway, look at the pictures. If there's writing on them, you're lucky, but try to find out who those people are. And lots of times, it's even more frustrating when there's writing on them and you don't know who they are. Delayed birth certificates. Has anybody ever looked at delayed birth certificates? People in every state, it varied, but at one time or another, usually early in the 20th century or even in the 19th century, if you're lucky, states started requiring birth and death records. Marriage records were always there. Marriage records, because marriage is a legal contract, among other things. So there was always a marriage record. I mean, the Yankees may have bought the courthouse, but at one time or another there was a marriage record. Once they started requiring death certificates, there is usually a death certificate. Birth certificates, maybe not. So in the early middle of the 20th century, we suddenly had something called Social Security. People had to prove how old they were, their exact age, in order to get a Social Security card. So a lot of people started going to their states and getting what they call delayed birth certificates. Now, the great thing about a delayed birth certificate is it's got information on it that the original birth certificate did not have. This one, for instance, Stella Walker. Now, she was born in 1898. Here's her father, here's her mother, Kara Nelson. Great, they were born in Goreville, Trenton. Okay, but now she's a Stella Brickner. And they want to know who Mrs., you can almost read it, Roscoe Brickner. And look where she lives, 167 Clinton Avenue, Brooklyn, New York. Where have we seen that address before? Now, having been to Brooklyn, I mean, you know, there could be 200 families living in this building, but at least we narrowed it down, if we hadn't already. Now, on the back of this is in the New Jersey State Archives, because she was born before 1900, the archives has them, anyone can look at them. And on the back, there's more information. Where were you married? She gives the marriage date. Names of brothers or sisters who were older than you. See, they're really trying to make sure you told them the truth about your birthday. And then down here, who were your children, for heaven's sake? Where were they born? Where did you live June 1st, 1905? Where did you live June 1st, 1915? Why did they want to know that? The New Jersey State Census was taken only 5 years. So they said to themselves, not being stupid, we'll look her up in the census and we'll see how old she was there. And we'll see if she's telling us the truth. So, now Tennessee didn't even have, my mother was from Tennessee, so I'm like, you know, schizophrenic. Tennessee did not start giving birth certificates until 1914. But once Social Security came in, people started getting birth certificates, even if they were born long before that. They are online. The Tennessee birth certificate, I can find my grandfather's delayed birth certificate online. And those are just like these. There's information on them that you would never find. I found a family in Texas. And when I went looking for the birth certificates in Tennessee, here's the grandfather of the people I'm talking to in Texas. He's out in Texas, but he needs a Tennessee birth certificate. And who did he ask? My grandfather's Aunt Sally. Well, I remember Aunt Sally didn't die until 1949. I remembered Aunt Sally. And it was so neat to see this connection and say to those people in Texas, yes, you really are my relative because I knew Aunt Sally, and this is her address. So it really is true. So there is stuff here that you're not going to find. You're lucky in a way if people have a delayed birth certificate. Does anybody here have relatives in New Jersey? Does anybody ever go over to the archives in New Jersey? They're wonderful. They are absolutely wonderful. You need to go there. They have these delayed birth certificates before 1900. They have death certificates now up until 1955. You can just walk in and look at them. They haven't redacted any cause of death. You don't have to prove that it's your grandfather, nothing. So they really have some really great stuff.
Where are Jersey State Archives? Where?
They are on East State Street, West State Street, in Trenton. Not hard to get to. You all know that the Pennsylvania death certificates are online, right? Pennsylvania death certificates are online until 1963, is it? I believe. I think it's 1963. Now, they didn't start until what? 1906. But if your family is in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia death certificates have been online, and they go all the way back into the early 1800s, sometimes the late 1700s, because what you're looking at,
1860.
1860
for birth certificate.
1860. That's a real death certificate.
Their
But they
cemetery
oh, they have the
returns.
cemetery returns.
You said birth certificate.
I'm sorry, death certificates. They have the cemetery returns back into the 1700s, some of them. If your person died in Philadelphia after 1906, you have a Philadelphia death certificate and you have a Pennsylvania state death certificate. And you want to get them both. They're both online. Free. Okay, before there was Facebook, there were small town newspapers. And even the big cities would have suburban, they would have a whole page. Page 14 would be the suburban news or news from surrounding areas or whatever. The Philadelphia Inquirer is online at genealogybank.com, which is a subscription site. But if you have relatives in South Jersey or Philadelphia, I highly recommend getting into it. They would have South Jersey news as well. This is from the Trenton Evening Times, which is at Genealogy Bank. Into my marriage report is there, put it that way. My wedding, the horrible dresses I made my girls wear, all that stuff is great to do. So I think it comes up into the 1990s even. The Philadelphia paper only comes to 1921. Keep hoping they'll come up with more. But this is a totally boring piece of information that appeared in 1914, I think it was. They got a new house, wow. And it tells you who all was there. Well, I knew all these people except Leon Compton. So I said to my Uncle Bob, who is still alive, who was Leon Compton? And he said, oh, that was Gussie's first husband. So I didn't know Gussie had a first husband, number one. So if you see a discussion of someone's wedding, some of the bridesmaids and groomsmen could just be friends and neighbors, but some of them are relatives. If you read about a funeral, lots of times it will list the pallbearers. Those are very often relatives. So read every name. If you find a name that you don't know, try to find out who that person is. Has anybody not looked at these? This is the World War I draft cards. The World War I draft cards were one of the earliest things that they put online that was wonderful because it's nationwide, they are searchable, and they give you the exact birth date of someone who maybe didn't have a birth certificate. So add middle names. We have found the strangest middle names. I think some of them made them up, just, I don't know why I think that. But anyway, this is Uncle Lou, and his name is Lewis, L-E-W-I-S, and his last name is Stevens, S-T-E-P-H-E-N-S. So if I was looking for him somewhere and couldn't find him, I would try S-T-E-V-E-N-S, and maybe L-O-U-I-S, to see how someone else had spelled him, but this is how he spelled himself, his exact birth date. He was born in Gloucester. Actually, it was Gloucester City in Camden County. I thought at first it was Gloucester County, but I found out that it was Gloucester City. In any event, I don't know how he was a farmer on Willow Street. I grew up on Willow Street in Bordentown. There are no farms. Maybe there were in 1918. But there is also the World War II registration. So a lot of these guys had to register again if they were still alive. They called it the old men's draft. Now, they weren't really planning to put these guys in the army. What they were looking for was who they would have to go back and work in the factories and other kinds of occupation once the young men all went off to war. My grandfather came home from the Spanish-American War, went to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad, and he drove a train until the end of World War II when the guys came home. So he would have retired ordinarily a few years earlier than he did, but the guys stayed on until the war was over and the younger men could come home. So Grandpa had to fill out on these cards, so did Uncle Lou, for World War II. Now, we now have the 1940 census online. Up until very recently, this was a great way to give these guys 12 more years after the 1930 census. And if you've lost them, again, it's nationwide. Now, some of the states are gone. I know Tennessee is gone for World War II. Some of the other states are gone as well. But if you find them in World War II, that's 1942, and you might be surprised at where they have moved to since we last saw them. So this is, they might have been white, might have all kinds of different things. So again, you gather up, you don't say, oh good, I know his birth date, I know his birthplace, check that off my bucket list, I'm good. You want to find every possible piece of documentation you can for this guy, because they all tell you different things. And we won't go into every census. The census, they kind of grew into around 1900, 1910, 1920, you've got a lot of information. After that, they started going downhill. 1940, there's not a whole lot of information. The last ones we filled out, there's no information. All they want to know is your name and your social security number, and they already know everything about you. So you don't have to tell them all that stuff again in the census. But if you could go back into 1900, now this one will tell you out here the address. I can still remember when the 1930 census came online. You said, how long have you been doing this? When the 1930 census came online, it was so exciting because there were people living in the same houses where I knew them to be living in as a child. And when you went through page after page, it was like you were walking down the street and looking into these people's houses. So you've got the street address out here, name, the relationship to the head of household. You've got the month and day of their birth. Are they widowed? Are they single? Are they married? You've got the number of children the woman has had and the number of children who are still living. And then you've got where were they born? Where were their parents born? Over here, if the person was not a born citizen, you have when they arrived here, and what is that one? There's a number of years in the United States. Out here, if they were naturalized, you would have that filled in as well. Now you find the year that someone came over. You can go online and find the manifests very often from the ship that they came in on. You might find pictures of the ship. Every obituary is not the same. Some of them, if you're looking at city obituaries, it's literally John Smith died this morning, funeral tomorrow at 2 o'clock from his residence, and we'll give you the address. It was literally a way of telling people to come to the funeral. Then they got very, very descriptive, especially in small towns. If someone was, you didn't even have to be prominent. They would tell, oh, which church you belong to, which war you fought in, if you're lucky, the names of the children, and where the cemetery is. Now, in a small town, you often have a weekly newspaper. You could die and be buried between editions, okay? So the weekly newspaper is not an invitation to the funeral. Very often, it's a description of the funeral. Who were the pallbearers? Which minister preached the sermon? So you know what church they went to. And this newspaper, you've got a Bordentown man. Bordentown in New Jersey is in Burlington County. Groveville is in Mercer County. At the time of his death, he was living in Camden County. So here are 3 different counties to look for this guy, and they're all mentioned in this clipping. It also gives you the names of the pallbearers, who all happen to have been nephews. And this is my grandfather, Charles Nelson. I was looking for him. The thing is, when you're searching in a newspaper online, you can search for any name. Very often, the old libraries have hard catalogs, like the old book catalogs. And in Allentown, New Jersey, someone has gone through the Allentown Messenger. Every time Mrs. Smith had lunch with Mrs. Jones, it's on a card in the file, and it tells you which edition of the newspaper that was in, which is wonderful. But when you're searching them online, you can search for every name that appears anywhere in the newspaper, not just in birth and death records. Your cousin Jimmy was arrested again for stealing hubcaps, so that's going to show up. So the newspaper subscriptions are, you might think costly, but they are wonderful to have. And if you stop and think, we used to go, we would have to rent film maybe there are only 3 years worth of the newspaper on that film, then you would have to go and sit and page and page and page through the film on the microfilm machine. There was no search engine. You didn't know for sure if you caught every reference to every person. And even if you did, the day after the film went back to Utah, you found out something else that you could have looked for. So this way they are online, you can always go back in and find them. 50th anniversaries. The newspapers loved 50th anniversaries. And it started probably the beginning of the 20th century. People were living longer, there was better medicine, there were, people were being taken care of, and you still had the people who had married young and never even thought about getting a divorce. So you had a lot of 50th anniversary announcements in the newspapers. This is the wife, you see how happy she is. They were in Bordentown, which is my hometown. Now, it tells you a lot here about the family. It tells you he was born in Pennsylvania, so you don't have to look for him in New Jersey. It tells you he was in the Civil War, in which unit he fought in. One thing it doesn't tell you is the name of the glorious Mrs. Steele. It doesn't even tell you her first name. She's Mrs. Steele. Sometimes they will tell you about the wedding. I have seen one where the couple and someone's brother or sister or whatever were married at the same time. So the article about their 50th wedding goes into this double wedding ceremony, and they tell you who was related to who and where they were married, and it's really, really interesting. Everyone is different. There's no real template for the 50th wedding anniversary announcements, but they're good to read.
Okay, so after you've gathered all your information from your own head and from your attic and your basement and talked to relatives and you've started finding some things like Nancy has shown, it really helps to have a way to organize things so that you know what information you have gathered on a family or a person and what information you may want to look for. Genealogists for a long time have used charts and record forms. There are multiple ones available, and your handout has a website that has free genealogy forms, so you can go and get all kinds of things. But traditionally, we use family group records. I gave you an example of that, in which you record information on the husband and the wife and their children, and then if the children are married, you start a group record for that person, their spouse and children. And then pedigree charts, which are in the direct line, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. They often start with you or with someone else you designate. And they can go back for generations. You can get these things big enough to wallpaper your living room if you want to, because of the many generations. Some people prefer to use computer programs, which I do. You have to take the last one out. Master genealogist doesn't exist anymore.
That's right.
They just closed down, right? But there are about 150 programs on the market. These are just ones that people like better than others. This is an example of the pedigree chart, and over here is where you would be, and then above and below your parents, and above and below them their parents. It goes back 100 generations, and you get one more here. So it's nice to be able to fill in all those spaces if you can. This is a chart of Nancy's that is filled in.
This is one of my grandmothers. So actually, it's not even me. It's 2 generations back from me. She is the only grandparent for whom I can fill out this entire chart. So don't get too impressed. But if this is daunting, if you look at all those empty spaces and say, I don't know all these people, start with one of your children or your grandchildren. If you start with a grandchild, you're already in the middle. You've already got 2 generations, 3 really counting yourself, and then your parents is 4, your grandparents is 5. So if you wanted to just fill out a chart and see how it would work, you could start with someone younger than you were.
This is one with some blanks in it.
Empty spaces. Empty spaces. Now you know who you need to look for. Now, since I printed this, I actually have found Martha's parents and one set of grandparents. We never thought we would. We thought you see her dates. She was born in 1824 and she died in 1894. But I found them in someone else's Civil War pension file. We have a whole nother talk about pension files. If you have met, has anyone here ever looked at a Civil War pension file? Aren't they wonderful? And if you send off for them to Washington, unless you tell them to send you the whole file, what you're going to get is what somebody considers genealogically significant. Well, the whole file, except for those horrible anatomical drawings, aside from those, the whole file is genealogically significant. Most people don't know that you're looking for the death date of somebody who's not even in the file. I was reading one not too long ago, and it was from Tennessee. They were Union soldiers, but they were from Tennessee. And the man had died and the woman had minor children. So they asked the midwife, how do you know the dates of these children? And she named one of the children and she said, I remember her birth date because she was born on the same day that J.M. Birchfield was murdered. I had been looking for James Madison Birchfield's death date for the last 20 years. And because it said Birchfield, it took me a minute. And then, of course, I had to jump up and down and holler a lot. So you go through those files, read every page, every date, every signature. You never know when you're going to find something that really doesn't belong there. But it's something that you need.
Okay, so the point is to use the family group records particularly to record what you know and figure out what you need to learn. And then to be able to create a list of what you need in order to plan your research further. And there are lots of sources for all this information. There are the vital records for marriage and death, for the census records, federal level, beginning in 1790, every 10 years, state census records in various states, sometimes between those 10 years. There are military records, and particularly we love the Civil War, because they had wonderful pension records, but so did the Revolutionary War and foreign war from the War of 1812 are coming online too. These absolutely wonderful. People don't always look for them, and it kind of gets a little boring to think you're just going to find out when somebody bought property and sold it. But actually within the deed it may say, this is property that was given by my grandfather, so-and-so, right? This is one I have Samuel and Charity Miller who are selling some property to their son, and it says Charity was previously the wife of Barney Hall. So, helpful stuff. And wills and estate records, cemetery records, as we mentioned, and newspapers are so important. And you can find them in many places. Libraries, public and private. This library has a wonderful collection. Lee Arnold is here, is going to be talking shortly about the collection here at SB. There are archives and courthouses, churches, local church offices, and some religious denominations have archives you can go to. Cemeteries have offices, of course, and the internet. Many things are online, and many things are free, and some things are by subscription. In the old days, we did not have that. We had just microfilm records. That was state-of-the-art. And you would sit all day and microfilm reader, spend 2 hours at least going through one film, hoping you would find one fact. At the end of the day, you had a slow back, sore neck, and blurry vision. It's much better now. There are many, many websites. Some of them are free, and so the free ones are listed here and on your handout. Sometimes you can find free sites and databases just by Googling a location, some town, with the hope that they had a newspaper. You might know it give you something in the public library there, and then there are subscription sites. Some of which are available to patrons of libraries, and this library here has some of those paid subscription sites downstairs on the computer, so patrons who come here can use that. There are local free sites that can also be extremely helpful. HSP has a website with their own, with lots of stuff on it. GSP, the Geological Society of Pennsylvania, has many databases available, some to the general public and some to our members only. Christ Church here in the city has a lot of their records, not the original digitized, but transcribed online. The Pennsylvania State Archives, the New Jersey State Archives, and so that there's just many things. And particularly we mentioned on Ancestry, the collection called Pennsylvania, New Jersey Church and Town Records, records that were gathered together decades ago from various sources and put on microfilm. And those are now on Ancestry.com. So there are many church records from Pennsylvania and New Jersey, some county court records, mayors, court index, Philadelphia, things like that. So lots of stuff out there. Just an internet caution, not everything is on the internet. Probably, even though there's more every day on the internet, and that's certainly true, we may never reach the point where everything's on the internet. So you have to learn about going to actual sources and doing the research in an old-fashioned way. And not everything on the internet is true. Figure that. Okay, so we hope you're going to get ready, get set, and you're going to find your ancestors.